My entitled dad always gets everybody sick anytime he gets sick. And as someone with chronic illness as well as a bad immune system, I'm seriously at my breaking point, as I simply cannot get sick again because of this man, despite my desperate pleadings that he not only stay away from me, but also take my health more seriously. Here's what happened. Okay, so last year, my dad got the flu, and he refused to quarantine himself, and then made us drive in the car with him with no AC on. As a result, we all got the flu, and it was a horrible experience. But he didn't seem bothered by the fact that he got literally everybody sick. In 2022, he went to Europe for work, and when he came back, we asked him to quarantine because it was peak COVID. Well, he said he didn't feel sick and refused to wear a mask, and he hugged all of us when he arrived, and then for the next 2 days literally touched everything in the house. And after that, as you can probably guess, he then tested positive for COVID. Now, luckily, nobody got sick, but we did fight with him because we asked him to take precautions and he completely refused to do so. He's now been feeling sick ever since Monday, and I asked him 5 times to get a COVID test and stay away from me because I was sick 2 weeks ago and I don't want to miss work again. I also have chronic health issues, so I don't need another illness on top of what I already have. Well, Friday, he decides to inform me that he knew one of his coworkers has COVID and he interacted with him days ago. He refused to quarantine and touched everything in the kitchen last week. He spent hours with my mom and sister in the car, continued to go to work, and even went to a Broadway show while feeling sick. He coughed everywhere because of his reflux and never even covered his mouth. And even still, he wouldn't get the COVID test. He drove in my car when I asked him not to because I don't want to get contaminated. Then today, he finally took the test and he tested positive for COVID, and he was laughing about it the entire time. This whole week, I've tried to stay away from him. I've tried to wash my hands, eat separately, and I wore a mask while my whole family made fun of me. I am livid because I have a horrendous immune system, and I don't understand how hard it is for him to comprehend that I don't want to get sick. So I'm quarantining myself because he refuses to do so. But even then, I'm starting to develop a fever and a headache now. Truly, I'm at a loss on how to deal with him. Sometimes he acknowledges that he should have been more careful, but then he just does it again. He told me that he barely feels sick and doesn't understand that while he barely feels sick, I may get COVID and have much worse symptoms due to my health issues. I'm honestly at such a loss because right now I seriously don't know what to do. Your dad and your family are super disrespectful. First of all, I'm sure that they know you don't have a good immune system. I'm sure this is not some kind of secret that you're keeping from them, and that they are well informed that you really should not be getting sick. So the fact that he still did this and was coughing everywhere and was refusing to get a COVID test or quarantine or anything like that is a massive sign that he literally just does not care. He thinks that this is just a joke. Meanwhile, you're the one who's gonna have to pay for it. And that is so unfair for you. Literally, you're just trying to live a healthy life and you're trying to stay out of taking more sick days from work. And here he is just walking around being like, oh, I feel fine. There's nothing wrong with me. And just completely disrespecting your space as well as your health. So in my opinion, I think it might be time to be very blunt with him and tell him straight up, listen, when you don't quarantine, I get sick. And if I get sick, then my life is at risk. Either he's in denial for some reason that no, you're not actually that sick, or he's just completely incompetent about what it means to have a bad immune system. But either way, his behavior is absolutely disgusting. And I know if I was in your shoes, I would be looking to probably move out, especially if I had chronic health issues that literally jeopardize my life on a daily basis. If you like Am I the Jerk, you're probably going to love Am I the Genius. Check it out, link down below in the description. Also, go to AmITheJerk.com/submit if you would like to submit your own stories. My entitled parents have spent a lifetime treating me like the lesser son, all because they simply love my older brother more than me. But after my older brother announced that he is not moving back in with them after college, they lost their minds in a way that I've never seen before, and I'm honestly still shocked and I now don't know what to do. Here's what happened. Okay, to start things out, I've been away for 2 years, and I kinda expected that I'd be back to post one last time in 2024 because my brother went for a 4-year bachelor's degree, much like I am currently doing. For those who remember my previous posts, I'm the guy whose parents basically got their butts verbally handed to them by the family for bad favoritism towards my older brother. Crap really hit the fan on my 18th birthday because my parents barely put any effort into it and went all out on my brother's 18th birthday in 2020 during the pandemic. They even managed to get a DJ for the party, and then they presented him with a car. Well, on my 18th birthday, I got no car or even anything close to a similar party, even though my academic standing was better than my brother's. I basically worked too hard for my parents' approval, and I never got it. When I asked them why my brother got a car and not me, they claimed that my brother worked worked harder for it, which was later confirmed to not be true when I got a bigger scholarship. Well, my grandma happened to be eavesdropping, and she laid into my parents, and then she got the rest of the family involved. And for the record, they were planning on getting involved anyways. My grandma just stepped things up right then and there. But after several family members laid into them, my parents just tried to save face and buy me a car, but they treated me like a brat who was getting a new toy when they gave me the keys. It was a late 90s Subaru that I honestly thought was great, but it turned out to have a blown head gasket that had barely been holding together with sealer. My parents treated me like I was a brat for wanting equal treatment, and then when the car went bad, their reaction was to apathetically shrug and call it karma, which caused my grandparents to start it all over again with them and caused a huge family intervention. I got many people messaging me and asking if having a car was really necessary, and that I basically forced my parents into it. But I didn't force anything, and it would have happened anyways if I didn't ask my parents why. And you know what? I really did need the car. I had no way of having a job without one. My parents lived 10 miles from the nearest bus stop, and I literally had no way of making money before college without a car. And no, I couldn't get rides. No one was available for that on a daily basis. So many people I talked to here tried to dance around my reasoning to insert their own logic, many of which I felt were projecting their own problems onto me. And then there was the straight up trolls and jerks. I don't even want to repeat, let alone remember what they all said to me, but a lot of them kept it up after I got the verdict that no, I'm not the jerk, almost as if they had an axe to grind, and it really did not help my mental state at the time. Now, as you can imagine, my family laid into my parents all over again in that family intervention, and by the time they were done, they looked like scolded kids sitting there looking at their feet. The Subaru was sold as junk, and my grandparents essentially forced my parents to buy me a better car. So I ended up getting a Honda Civic, and my uncle went over the car with a fine-tooth comb before they bought it. And that time, my parents didn't even treat me like a brat. And yes, I still have the Honda, and yes, it still works fine. I've kept up with the oil changes and the like, and I've not had any accidents either, as I really am a careful driver. But honestly, the final thing that broke my parents before I left was finding out that I got a better scholarship than my brother. Any excuses they'd previously had to favor my brother so completely were thrown out the window, and were forced to give me words of encouragement I knew they didn't mean. And in wondering why they disliked me so much, I later found out from my grandma why I was treated differently was because my parents had wanted their second child to be a girl. My grandma ended up admitting even more to me later after I left for college. Before I was born, my parents were so convinced that I would be a girl that they bought a bunch of girl stuff without even checking my gender through ultrasound. Well, I found out from my grandma about a year ago that my mom tried raising me as a girl for like the first 6 months of my life. She was putting me in girls' clothing and calling me by a different name, and my father completely enabled it all. And I know this is all true because my grandma showed me old family photos of me and my brother when I was an infant, and I was wearing pink in all of them. There was even a visible name tag on some of them, and on it had the name my parents wanted for a girl. But once word got out, my parents stopped dressing me as a girl. My grandparents told my mother that trying to raise me as something I wasn't even giving me a choice on whether or not I wanted to be that. And although my family is rather old school, my grandparents are surprisingly open-minded people, and they put the hammer down on my parents. So the girl treatment stopped, but instead of new clothing, they gave me my brother's hand-me-downs for years. That is, until my grandparents noticed that as well and did something about it. Finding out all of this made me realize that my grandparents kept my childhood for being far worse than it was, and they never told me until this past couple of years. So to that end, I am incredibly thankful for them. My mother apparently also struggled to call me by my real name for 2 years or so, and because my parents didn't get a girl, they refused to connect with me like they did my brother. You know, the boy that they actually wanted. And when my grandparents heard I wasn't getting anything new like my brother was, they said that they would petition for guardianship over me, and that they had evidence of the various things I described too. Well, my parents couldn't stand for anything that could become a public scandal, so they stopped with the hand-me-downs and pretended to love me for a while. But as I got older, it degenerated into complete indifference, and then maybe into hate. I'm honestly not sure. Hate means that you still care in some kind of way, but indifference is the actual opposite of love. I just know my parents couldn't accept that their favorite son wasn't the best at everything compared to their unwanted son. And since I moved out, they've barely interacted with the family. They threw themselves into work, in part because the rest of the family forced them to contribute to my college, like they did my brothers, but also because to them, working was the only thing that gave them a reason to tell everyone to leave them alone. My grandma suspects they've even slept in their cars a few times just to avoid going home. I only saw my parents at Christmas at my uncle's house for the past couple of years, and they barely even spoke to me. Now that I was living my best life away from them, I guess you could say that they just stopped bothering to act like I was their son. They don't want me anymore after the family humiliation they feel like they suffered, even though they know they brought it on themselves, and they've become workaholics to do little else. My grandmother told me my bedroom is basically exactly how I left it on the day that I moved out. My parents have not even gone inside of it, but they kept my brother's room clean and ready for the day that he'd finally come back home after college. Except that is not what happened. They flew out to see him for his graduation and had a big celebration with him. And of course, I was not invited. Not that I could afford it in the first place. But my grandparents went along and they gave me all the juicy details. My parents were still convinced my brother would be coming back home. And that's when he awkwardly told them that he already secured a job through an internship that he had done the past year, and that he had found an apartment of his own too. Well, when they heard this, my father became furious, and my mother lost her mind crying and begging him to come home. But he refused. You see, this past 2 years, my brother and I have reconnected a bit. He found my account online and then he called me. He wasn't angry, but honestly just wanted to talk. He admitted to me that our parents put him through a lot as well. Our parents absolutely smothered him, especially when I wasn't around. And our father was also quite strict with his expectations. So the fact that I did better than my brother when our parents had invested everything into him just completely broke them. And now they're extra broken because my brother refused to come home with them. The way our parents treated my brother is also the reason we stopped connecting as siblings until this past couple of years. He did bully me at times when we were growing up, but that's because being the favorite went to his head. But it was favoritism with strings attached. And when he realized that, he got counseling after moving out. My brother also has a girlfriend that he met while in college, and he kept her a secret because he knew our parents wouldn't approve, and well, they didn't when they found out. So my brother blew up on them, especially when my mother referred to his girlfriend as if she was some kind of like lady of the night, if you know what I mean. Mind you, my mom hasn't even met her at this point. For the record, my brother's girlfriend is in nursing school and a year away from graduation herself, and my brother says that she's the best. Now, I've never met her, but she sounds wonderful by the way he's described her. My grandma told me my mother went so far as to hire a private investigator to find out who my brother's girlfriend actually was, and she was actually irritated to know that she was squeaky clean, and she came from a good family on the same side politically too. But in her mind, she was the reason my brother wasn't coming back, even though my brother made it clear he decided that before even meeting his girlfriend. My father had basically become stoically silent about it from what I heard, but my mother let it slip to my brother that she'd hired a detective, and my brother gave our parents a piece of his mind, and this led to a whole argument about how they gave him everything, and he was ungrateful for not coming back. But he called them out that being the favorite child is awful as well, because they nearly made him like them, and this absolutely broke my parents to hear that. My brother told our grandparents, and they staged another family intervention, one that I was even involved in through video call. My parents tried to not even pay attention to me, but even my brother told them to talk to me. We all told them enough was enough. They had 2 sons and they needed to start treating us fairly, because they let something as idiotic as not being born the gender they wanted to ruin their love for me from day one. It was then that my father hit his breaking point. He started screaming out loud, "You want us to admit we messed up? Well, yeah, we did. What do you want us to do about it? You want us to time travel? We're paying for the original poster's college too. What more does he want from us?" Eventually, things ended very poorly in that intervention. My mom cried that she was sorry to me, but even then, I still didn't feel her heart was in it, because she didn't spend much time apologizing to me at all before moving on to my brother through the phone he was video calling from. And she spent a long time crying and apologizing to him. That is, until he told her to go back and actually apologize to me like she meant it. Well, it was at that moment that my father grabbed the phone and shut it off. Then he just sat down and told everybody else to leave. The last thing my grandparents said to my parents was that they were disappointed in them, and that maybe losing both sons has finally shown them that they should have never favored one of us. Right now, my parents are not on speaking terms with the rest of the family. My grandma heard a rumor they may be planning to move, but they have a paid-off country home and great careers. I feel like they would be fools to move. But since my brother isn't going back, and I'm not likely to go back either, I suppose it's not really an issue. I kind of doubt that they would welcome me in if I visit after the crap that went down, but I am still very thankful to them for helping to pay for my college. My student loans were significantly reduced thanks to them. But when it comes to being parents themselves, I think we can all agree that they just didn't do a very good job. Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that your parents absolutely suck, and they played favorites to such a degree that it literally almost ruined your life. Like, that's not fair for you at all. And from the sounds of it, especially based on your backstory, this has been going on ever since you were a kid. And that's just not fair. Not only that they didn't treat you correctly or even equally with your brother, but also that you just found out that they didn't even want you in the first place. They wanted a little girl and not a boy. So for them to treat you in this way and basically like ostracize you from the family and forcibly make you the rejected son, like that in my opinion is just straight up awful, because you did not deserve that in the slightest, and they are awful parents for the way that they treated you. An entitled old jerk demands a price cut literally only because of his age and his veteran status. But when I deny him his request, he claims that I'm disrespecting veterans for not giving him my product at a third of the price. Here's what happened. Okay, for starters, I build scale model ships because I'm kind of lame. Unfortunately, the genre is dominated by often angry old people who seem to think that the rest of us owe them everything because they managed to get old. Now, let me get down to some specifics. I have a lot of rare resin kits that I've collected over the years, and I have decided to offload some stuff that were mostly impulse buys. I checked eBay's sold auctions and other examples of recent sales, and I decided to price my items accordingly. I paid for a vendor booth at a show, and people really were cool for the most part. Many did bargain with me, and that's okay. I sold some bundles, and then I moved on to reasonable offers. Well, that's when this old entitled jerk steps in, who evidently was alive purely on his own self-persecution and bitterness. This guy saw a large resin model kit of a Japanese battleship that I had priced at about $375. This was the original retail, with recent sales well north of $400. He came by a few times, and he grumbled about my prices being too high for people on fixed incomes, but I honestly just ignored him. Well, towards the end of the show, he came back to my booth and offered me $100 for it, but I just flatly refused. He told me he'd always wanted that kit and would build it, and that he's a disabled veteran that feels better when he builds. But I was unsurprised given his previous whinings at my booth and prior shows. I'm not joking when I say he tends to walk even more laboriously when trying to rip off a vendor. So I told him thank you for your service, and then I said I would sell him the kit for $325 cash, which is what I paid for. Well, when I said that, the dude fell into a complete rage, accusing me of disrespecting veterans. He then told me to my face that I take advantage of old people who don't have the money for expensive things. Now, as a side note, this guy has gout breath, and trust me, if you know, you know. I reminded him that this is a hobby. It's not his home or his food bill or his transportation. After calling me everything but a white boy, the man kicks my vendor table and stomps away like a petulant sixth grader. Now, what was the worst part about all of this? I had other old entitled modelers asking me why I couldn't work with him because of the aforementioned reasons. They were less antagonistic, but they were kind of rooting for his side as well. And these same people wonder why younger folk don't attend scale model shows, or why it's becoming increasingly hard to find vendors who don't simply use an online auction or some kind of marketplace. I'm all down with giving deals, but trying to guilt someone into compliance is honestly a really awful thing to do. Yeah, that's really rude in my opinion. Just because you want something and you're like really adamant about getting it, doesn't mean you have to be like, wow, you disrespect veterans. You're making me pay full price instead of giving it to me at a third of the price. Like seriously, that is so obnoxious and so uncalled for. The original poster wasn't disrespecting this guy because he was a veteran. He was polite and professional, but still remained firm on his prices and said, listen, this is what it cost. So good for you for standing up for yourself, because this guy was completely out of line. Am I the jerk for yelling at my neighbor's kids after they knowingly scratched my car and then rode off on their bikes to try and avoid any kind of responsibility? Because right now in retrospect, I worry that I might have taken things a bit too far, because right now I really don't know what to do. Here's what happened. Okay, so today I was doing some yard work when the neighbor's kid, who is about 15 years old, came out of their garage with their bicycles. We share a driveway since it is a townhouse block, and I had my car parked outside. Since I just got a new car a few weeks ago, I am admittedly paranoid about any potential damage. So as they wheeled their bikes through the space between my car and the neighbors, I was watching very closely. Once they reached the end of the driveway, one of the kids put the bike on the kickstand and walked back towards the house. And as they walked away, the bike fell over, hitting the side of my car. When they heard the bike hit the car and fall to the ground, they looked to the side of the car and then directly at me. And then they got on the bike and rode off. Well, I got up to check and see if there was any damage, and there was a black scratch on the bumper. The other sibling, who had not ridden off yet, was there, and I told him that the other had scratched the car and took off. So they said they would go get them and come back, and a few minutes later they returned. Well, when they returned, I raised my voice at both of them, and I said that when you damage someone's property, you don't pretend that it didn't didn't happen. You apologize and you try to make it right. They were saying that they didn't see the scratch and that they didn't hear it, and all sorts of other excuses. But since they made direct eye contact with me when it happened, this only made me angrier. After a few minutes, I managed to get the scratch off the car, so there was no damage and the kids rode off. But with all of this in mind, am I the jerk for yelling at these kids instead of waiting for their parents to return home? What should I do? No, I don't think you're in the wrong for yelling at these kids, because clearly they did not want to get in trouble for something they definitely did. Whether you remove the scratch or not, the fact that they rode off trying to escape any kind of responsibility, in my opinion, is super inappropriate. Because you have it right, in my opinion. If you damage someone's property, you absolutely need to fess up to it. It is the right thing to do, in my opinion, especially when you do it literally right in front of the person who owns the property. So no, I don't think you're in the wrong at all, because the way these kids acted by running off, in my opinion, is completely unacceptable. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. To finish listening to all the stories, check out the playlist at the top of the description. And if you want some chill music to put on in the background, check out easymode.com. If you like Am I the Jerk, subscribe to Am I the Genius. Everything will be linked down below in the description.